So, in this video, we are going to cover from the Age of Chaucer to the Restoration period in view of what you need to study for the coming national eligibility test for the lectureship and fellowship. The pilgrimage in medieval literature. You should examine the centrality of the pilgrimage in medieval life and literature. It will look first at the idea of the pilgrimage in the Old Testament and medieval drama. You should study the rise of drama in medieval Europe in selected English Mr. Ian Miracle plays as well as European cognates. Dream in medieval literature. Here, you should study prototypes of the dream from classical and biblical sources, medieval ones like the Roman de Laros, others from hagiographical texts. From here you will move to medieval dream poems in English where the dream frames narrative poems and also examine dreams mentioned or described in the course of the narrative poems. Arthurian romance. The Arthurian legends, French and British traditions, the rise of romance, text by Malloy, Chrétien de Troyes, Gawain and the Green Knight, the quest of the Holy Grail. Chaucer. You must specialize in the work of Chaucer, focusing on historical and social background, language, poetic forms and a close study of selected texts. Langland. Langland should be studied in comparison with Chaucer. Their separate uses of allegory, dream, estate satire and pilgrimage will be studied comparatively. Petrarch and the Renaissance. Examine the poetry and literary influences of Petrarch, whose work inaugurates in many important ways the cultural and historical movement known as the Renaissance. It will include close examination of texts while also considering the history of ideas, forms and motifs. Humanism. Attempt to define the contours of the complex and wide-ranging European pedagogic and cultural enterprise known as humanism. It will begin by looking at the thought and influence of the earliest European humanists, professional scholars and teachers located mainly in Italy, and then consider the spread of the movement all over Europe, especially through the influence of figures such as Erasmus. The association of this pedagogic enterprise with philosophical, cultural and literary achievements, as well as its social and intellectual prestige, will be examined. Renaissance epic. Examine the mixed form of Renaissance epic, focusing on exemplary instances of chivalric or romantic epic such as those written by Ariosto, Tasso and Spenser. It will also take into account other Renaissance endeavors in the epic form, such as those by Ronsard, Vida or du Bartas, looking ahead to the summit of Renaissance epic composition as achieved in the poetry of Milton. It will relate texts not only to contemporary history and culture, but also to Renaissance theories of heroic and epic poetry, such as that provided by Tassow's discourses on the heroic poem. The Protestant Reformation. Reform and Reformation, late medieval religion, humanism and the Reformation, study of major ideas of Luther, Zwingli, Calvin, Arminius, the Radical Reformation, literature and Reformation thought, suggested reading, selections from major Reformation texts in H.J. Hillerbrand, The Protestant Reformation. Renaissance political thought, overview of classical and medieval political theory, early humanism, the Vir Virtutis, Machiavelli, fortune and virtue, the state of nature and the social contract, Protestant and Reformed political theory. Renaissance drama, Thomas Kyd, The Spanish Tragedy, Christopher Marlowe, Dr. Faustus, versions, A and B, John Webster, The White Devil, John Ford, 'Tis Pity Sees a Whore, John Lilly, Endymion or Campaspe, Ben Jonson, Epicene or Volpone, Thomas Middleton and Thomas Dekker, The Roaring Girl Thomas Middleton, A Chase Made in Cheapside, John Fletcher, The Wild Goose Chase or Philander Ben Jonson, Oberon, The Faerie Prince, The Golden Age Restored, Love's Triumph through Callipolis. The Tempest and its aftermath. Look at Shakespeare's The Tempest, as well as its colonial and post-colonial reappropriations. Begin with a careful reading of the play in its contemporary historical and dramatic contexts, placing it against the Bermuda pamphlets as well as within the politics of the Stuart court, and considering the play's formal and genetic characteristics. Examine the mythicization of the Prospero-Caliban relationship and other elements of the play over centuries of rereading, involving not only interpretation but reworking. A knowledge of practices in the playhouse and printing house of the time, and an acquaintance with the history of the early modern English theatre would be expected. Shakespeare. A. Shakespeare's life and professional career. B. Shakespeare's texts, canon and chronology. C. Shakespeare's theatre, architecture, audience, patronage, regulation. D. Shakespeare scholarship and criticism, select study of editions, schools, etc. E. Shakespeare and India, curriculum, performance, translation. Shakespeare in the 20th century. A. 20th century reworkings, adaptations and appropriations of Shakespeare as Bird, Bond, etc. B. Shakespeare on film. C. 20th century performances of Shakespeare. D. Post-colonial Shakespeare as Shakespeare and Us. E. The Shakespeare industry. Metaphysical poetry. A close study of selections from the religious and secular poetry of Donne, Herbert, Vaughan, Traherne, Marvell and Crashaw. Donne. Be acquainted with the poetry and prose writings of John Donne, examining his career, his secular and religious writings, and his place in the culture of late 16th and early 17th century England. Candidates will be expected to read most of Donne as major work in its social and historical context. Revenge tragedy. Read the development of the revenge genre, from its classical beginnings, Oresteia, Seneca's Thyists, etc., to its specific manifestations in Elizabethan and Jacobean drama. It will involve a close study of dramatists like Kyd, the Spanish tragedy, Shakespeare, Titus Andronicus and Hamlet, Torn, the Revenger's tragedy, Webster, the White Devil and Duchess of Malfi, Ford, the Broken Heart, focusing on themes of family, kinship, honor codes, feudalism, Christianity, notions of masculinity, etc. Science, poetry and politics in the Renaissance. Focus on the advancements in astronomy, medicine and other sciences in the Renaissance, as well as some of the pseudosciences allied with these fields. Draw attention to the debates that arose as a result, and at the way in which this entire intellectual ferment is reflected in the poetry of Milton, Marvell, Donne and others. A. Did women have a Renaissance? Examining Joan Kelly's question through a study of the debates about women in the different discourses of politics, religion, education, marriage and family, medicine, etc. B. Representations of women in men's literature / feminist readings of drama, romances, masques, lyrics and satire. D. Women's writings. A study of women authors like Mary Sidney, Queen Elizabeth, Isabella Whitney, Amelia Lanner, Elizabeth Carey, Mary Roth and others. This section will also examine how certain genres were appropriated and feminized by women. Milton. Prose and poetry. Nativity Ode, Comus, Lycidas, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, Samson Agonists, of Reformation, Areopagitica, Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce, Ready and Easy Way. Enlightenment and the Culture of Reason. Study the movement known as the European Enlightenment, tracing its beginnings in the scientific revolution of the 17th century, its links with the spirit of rational inquiry and philosophical empiricism fostered by the Royal Society and John Locke, and its pan-European spread through the thought of the 18th century philosophers. Attention will be focused on representative English writers, such as Jonathan Swift, and reference made to the larger context of European thought. The beginnings of the novel. Focus on the rise and development of the novel in English, and its emergence as the vehicle of a new representational impulse in the early 18th century and thereafter. Beginning with examples of Elizabethan prose fiction, read representative texts from Defoe's turn, and to relate them to social and historical contexts. English literature, 1630 to 1760. A. Poetry. Vaughan, Marvell, Milton, Dryden and Pope. B. Fiction. Ben, Fielding and Sterne. C. Allegory and satire. Bunyan and Swift. D. Non-fictional prose. Biography/autobiography, travel literature, religious, scientific and philosophical prose. E. Drama. Dryden, Congreve and Wycherley. So we have covered from Chaucer to Restoration period. In the next video, we will talk about the Romantic and the Victorian literature. Thank you. And don't forget to like a video and please subscribe to the channel.